heading away from Slough towards Maidenhead following an accident. In Kent, the M20 stays closed eastbound from junction 8 to 10A towards Ashford for a police investigation. And also in Kent, in Ashford, the A28 Canterbury Road is closed for a police investigation, causing queues on local routes this evening. And that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very, very good evening to you. It's Thursday, the 23rd of January. I'm Martin Daubney, filling in for the big man, Nigel Farage, on tonight's Farage Show. The evil triple child murderer, Axel Radicabana, has been jailed for life with a minimum term in prison of 52 years. In the minutes of Radicabana being jailed, the law officers announced they had received a request to consider whether the 52-year minimum term was too short. And in this past half hour, Nigel Farage has gone further, calling for the head of the Crown Prosecution Service to resign. We'll be getting details from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's been live outside Liverpool Crown Court all day for us.
Well, after a day of appalling behaviour in Liverpool Crown Court, refusing to sit in the dock, Axel Radicabana was driven by police escort from the court to begin those 51 years in jail before he is eligible for parole. Left this court to shout and booze as he headed to begin his jail term.
It's been astonishing reporting today from Mark White and our colleague Sophie Reaper. Moving on, shocking new data has revealed that almost 1 in 12 people living in London are illegal immigrants. What is the economic impact and the implications on public services? And most importantly, where do we draw the line? And our protectors, guardians of the peace, Britain's Metropolitan Police Service are finally out of special measures, despite the fact that police services in the UK were failing in almost every area just 5 months ago. What's changed? Now, all of that to come in the show. But first, here's your news headlines, and it's Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks very much indeed. Our top story. Southport child killer Axel Radicabana has been jailed for a minimum of 52 years, with the judge describing the murders of 3 young girls at a dance class last summer ferocious and sadistic. A warning, viewers may find some of the details distressing. Now, this is new footage that was released earlier of the moment Radicabana left a taxi without paying before launching his knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. The court heard harrowing details about how the attack unfolded and how many of the victims suffered injuries to their backs as they were trying to escape. It also emerged Radicabana boasted of his attack shortly after being arrested, telling police it was a good thing that children were dead. The 18-year-old pleaded guilty to murders of Alice de Silva Aguiar, BB King and Elsie Dot Stancombe, and 10 charges of attempted murder. During sentencing earlier in the day, he was twice ordered out of the dock after shouting about feeling ill. During the sentencing, Mr Justice Goose said Radicabana had caused shock and revulsion to the whole nation and that he would have killed all 26 children if he'd been able.
I'm now going to sentence Axel Radicabana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years.
Police say a 53-year-old man wanted in connection with the death of a woman in Plymouth may be armed and dangerous. They're looking for Paul Anthony Butler after a woman in her 40s was attacked in the West Ho area of the city on Wednesday night. She died in hospital in the early hours of Thursday. Detectives believe the two people were known to each other. Thousands of schools across the country are expected to close tomorrow as Storm Aoin heads towards the UK. That includes all schools in Northern Ireland and all of those in 16 councils in Scotland, where all trains have been suspended. Red weather warnings for up to 100 miles per hour have been forecast. Now, drivers are being advised to stay off the roads as well. Tornadoes could hit parts of the UK later today as the storm arrives. The Met Office has advised people to secure loose items outside their homes, as there could be a danger to life caused by flying debris. And the Spanish-language film Emilia Perez leads the way at the Oscars with 13 nominations, followed by Wicked and The Brutalist with 10 apiece. Wicked's Ariana Grande has been nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Her British co-star Cynthia Erivo is up for Best Actress. Elton John's achieved his 5th original song nomination after the release of his music documentary song Never Too Late. Fellow British stars Felicity Jones and Ralph Fiennes are also up for Oscars following their roles in The Brutalist and Conclave, respectively. Much more coming up throughout the day. That's it for the moment.
Thank you, Aaron. Now, welcome to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man. The evil triple child killer Axel Rudakabana has been jailed for life with a minimum term in prison of 52 years. This vile individual's punishment is thought to be the longest handed out to a killer of his age. The father of one of the girls murdered was heard calling out "coward" as Rudakabana was removed from court after shouting in the dock. And those present, family members and victims, listened to emotional victim impact statements and finally the sentencing of the sadistic killer without him even being present. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White joins me now. Mark, welcome to the show. You've been reporting on this all day. Rudakabana behaved appallingly. The families acted with supreme dignity. Mr. Justice Goose said the families will never recover. Who could dispute these acts as evil? Tell us about an astonishing day.
Yes, indeed. The trial judge said the attack in Southport was equivalent to the very worst terror attack in terms of the seriousness of this crime and the sentence that it deserved. He also said that had Axel Rudakabana been 9 days older, had he celebrated his 18th birthday, then he would have been jailed for a whole life term. But under the law, because he was 17 when he committed those horrific attacks, he will not be granted that whole life jail term. He can conceivably be released on parole at age 69. However, the judge said in all likelihood he would probably remain behind bars for the rest of his life. I've been taking a look back at this most horrific of crimes.
That's it, yeah, it's down there. Down there.
In the back of a local taxi, this is Southport killer Axel Rudakabana, just moments before he shattered the innocence of a children's dance class in the most horrific way imaginable. There would be no payment for the driver from this violence-obsessed teenager as he suddenly jumps out of the taxi, making his way towards the entrance of the Heart Space venue. It's so incredibly heartbreaking to watch these images as in the background music can clearly be heard from the Taylor Swift themed dance class inside, as the youngsters here had no idea of the evil about to enter their world. 3 of those innocents were murdered. 8 others and 2 adults injured in a sustained stabbing attack that left even the most experienced first responders completely traumatised.
Yeah, the events that took place on the 29th of July last year were just truly horrific. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. You know, whilst we've heard the sentencing this week of Axel Rudikabana, which is positive, you know, my thoughts remain with the families of Elsie, Bibi and Alice, the other girls and adults that were injured, and those that have been traumatised by what they saw on that day. Just truly horrific.
This is the same model as the chef's knife Rudikabana bought on Amazon and used in the attack. Although he refused to speak to investigators, he was overheard on an audio recording muttering to himself in police custody, saying he was glad the young girls were dead and satisfied he'd achieved what he set out to do. Multiple failings by state agencies have only served to compound the grief and the anger of the bereaved families and the wider community. Aged just 13, this twisted and violent young man began taking knives to school. He admitted to doing this on 10 separate occasions. He openly bragged of his desire to carry out a school massacre. But despite 3 separate referrals to the Prevent Counter-Extremism programme, no action was taken.
Axel Rudikabana first became known to Children's Social Care in 2019, following referrals from the police into the multi-agency Safeguarding Hub. A strategy discussion, which is a multi-agency meeting involving key professionals, in this case social work, early help, police, health and education, met to plan actions and share information following the attack that took place in the school.
This is Rudikabana near his Lancashire home a week before the Southport attack, calling a taxi with the likely intention of carrying out an attack at his former high school. His father intervened and begged the taxi driver not to drive him there. It's not known exactly what his family knew about his attack plans and whether any of them could face prosecution. But at the family home, police discovered paraphernalia used by the teenager to make the deadly biological toxin ricin, a quantity of which was found in this Tupperware box. A PDF document with information linked to an Al-Qaeda training manual was also found within days of the attack. Yet it took 3 months before authorities finally revealed to the public he would also face a terror charge and biological weapons charge. Those charges came months after the widespread disorder, fueled by anger and suspicion that the public were not being told key facts about the suspect. The Prime Minister and others have admitted facts were withheld. Police said they wanted to reveal more information to help counter public misinformation, but were prevented from doing so by the Crown Prosecution Service. The CPS said to do otherwise could have led to the collapse of the case.
We felt that the risk of putting any detailed information, more than we put out already, could prejudice that fair trial. And given that our priority was to make sure that justice was done, that's where we made the decisions that we did.
Axel Rudikabana is now firmly behind bars, having shown absolutely no remorse. Bereaved families will never fully recover, and public trust in the authorities to tell them the truth in future has been badly dented. Mark White, GB News, Merseyside.
Yeah, truly fantastic reporting today from my colleagues Mark White and Sophie Reaper. And now Rudikabana will rot in jail until at least August 2076. But the question remains, was Axel Rudikabana a terrorist or not? Well, after the break, I'll be joined by the Labour Party MP who had this to say on the matter in the House of Commons just yesterday.
He's been charged under the Terrorism Act and the Biological Weapons Act. The man is a terrorist, Mr. Speaker.
Well, that man, Mike Tapp, the MP for Dover for the Labour Party, joins me in the studio next. Don't go anywhere.
Mid-afternoon Britain. Weekdays from midday.
People living with obesity are people, and they deserve the right for treatment and care as much as anyone else. What we need to understand is that obesity is a chronic condition, or a disease, as some people call it. It's not a choice. And this is the bit that people really struggle with, is that people think this is a lifestyle choice and people have done this to themselves. What we now know is the science and the evidence shows us that this isn't a choice. People have genetic predispositions for living with obesity. What we need to do is be a bit more compassionate and caring to people that live with obesity and support them to make healthier choices, not actually just discriminate and tell them that they're doing something wrong when, you know, if I had asthma, for instance, you wouldn't be saying the same thing to me there. But then it's exactly the same.
Usually, if you're going for an operation of some form or other, there'll be often there is a criteria. So my mother, she had a knee operation. They wanted to make sure her blood pressure was right and all these things. This is, I mean, to hear somebody say that obesity isn't a choice just because you've got genetic predisposition to it, it's just exactly why people seem to be legitimising being overweight. Ozempic has proved that people are overweight because they eat too much. Because Ozempic tells you to stop eating, it makes you think that you've eaten and makes you feel full, so you don't eat. You may be predisposed to anything, but you also have a large percentage of responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. So absolutely, it is in the patient's best interests, because if you're overweight, it'll take you longer to heal. You're more likely to have complications, the same if you smoke, and also the outcomes are usually better. So for a smoker, if you quit, say, 4 weeks before surgery, you're 25%, your risk is lower of respiratory complications. So this is literally, of course, it's discriminatory, because you have to decide, you have to prioritise the people that are likely to survive the operations.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, tonight standing in for the big man. Now, the triple child murderer Axel Rudakabana today was found guilty of committing or preparing an act of terrorism. But astonishingly, by law, it's still not considered a terror attack. Well, why? Let's take a listen to what the judge, Mr. Justice Goose, said earlier on today.
However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest.
So was Rudakabana a terrorist or not? Simple question, right? Well, just yesterday, the Labour Party MP for Dover, Mike Tapp, what he urged the Home Secretary to review the legal framework.
The attack itself has not been labelled as terrorism due to the lack of a clear ideological motive, a decision for the police and the CPS. Will the Home Office look into how our legal frameworks can be updated to recognise the full horror of acts intended to terrorise?
My friend is right. We do need to ensure that the legal framework is up to date to make sure that there is the scope and the powers and the sentencing, frankly, as well, to ensure that where there are acts intended to terrorise, even where there is no ideology, that there are sufficient powers in place to be able to deal with this. And he is also right to say that because this man has been charged under the Terrorism Act and has pleaded guilty to a terrorist offence, I can confirm he will be treated as a terrorist offender in prison as well.
So rather confusing, isn't it? Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined in the studio now by the Labour MP and the former Ministry of Defence counter-terror official, and that is Mike Tapp, as well as my wonderful panel. That's the former Conservative MP and Minister Sir John Redwood, and the Labour peer, Lord John Mann. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Let's start with you, Mr Tapp. Why the confusion? In the early days, the Merseyside police said definitely not terrorism, and then Angela Rayner doubled down and said if you say it's terrorism, it's fake news, it's a conspiracy theory. And then Sir Keir Starmer leapt in and said, well, if you say it's terrorism, you're far right. And yet yesterday, you said, clear as a nose on your face, this is terrorism. Wherein lies the truth? We're all confused.
It is quite complex, Martin. It's really important. All the viewers, and I think most of the public, will agree with me that this man is a terrorist. The judge alluded to that, and Yvette Cooper alluded to agreement as well. The complex part here is, yes, he killed people, and that was vile. He terrorised. He had an Al-Qaeda manual. He produced ricin. But the CPS made a decision to charge on murder because there wasn't that clear ideological motivation for carrying out the murders. He's clearly a terrorist, and that's why Yvette Cooper was right to say that they'll look at the legal framework to look at things like intention to terrorise, so that these people can be treated as terrorists in the future.
Is that legal framework, pardon my French, part of the problem, and people at Prevent, for example, have got blood on their hands? Why was he not intercepted 3 times? He had an interface with Prevent. What, was he the wrong kind of terrorist? He was a black guy threatening to murder white kids in school, caught with a knife 10 times. He got a jihadi manual. You're not telling me, I don't know, if he'd have read a speech by Adolf Hitler and gone and killed 3 people in a school, they wouldn't call him far right. Why is there a reluctance to label people as terrorists when it's the wrong kind of terrorism?
It's clear this man is a terrorist. When it comes to charging, the CPS have to charge with the offence that they're most likely to convict on. And if there isn't that clear evidence of that motivation ideology leading to those vile murders, they've got to go with the one that's most likely to succeed. So that was most likely the right choice here, and that's why we've seen him convicted. And of course, language is really important. And that's within, British values to ensure that people like this go to prison. So we have to be really careful leading up to a sentencing and a trial with what we say.
Do you think for a moment that Axel Rudakabana complied or respected in the most basic form British values?
Absolutely not. And that is exactly why we have to demonstrate British values to ensure that vile people like him go to prison. That's what we've seen today.
Is part of the problem Prevent? I spoke to a former Prevent officer today who told me an astonishing thing. They're obsessed with the far right, and the evidence bears it out. 75% of the casework is Islamist terrorists, and yet she told me the people within the organisation, just with echoes of the rape gangs, are too afraid to pursue Islamist terrorists on the whole because it's a bit racist. But they're trying to find the non-existent far right, and that means people like Rudakabana, because they didn't tick a box, a black guy threatened to kill white people, somebody who was obsessed with Al-Qaeda, but also maybe the IRA, he simply slipped through the net. It's institutional and grotesque failure.
And this is why it's so important that we have this national review, so that we can put on the table everything that happened from the first referral to the last. How did he slip through the net, so we can make sure it doesn't happen again? And let me just add...
And we heard that time and time again. We heard that at Paolo Calacale in Nottingham.
We need to know the facts before, in order to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. But I will also say, having worked in counter-terrorism with really, committed counter-terror officers, people are working tirelessly to stop attacks from happening.
Well,
and of course, many have been stopped, and one slips through the net, which is an absolute absolute tragedy, and we've got to get to the bottom of that to make sure it doesn't happen again.
What would that inquiry look like? For example, I'd like to see, no doubt GBNews viewers would like to see, whoever picked this guy up and didn't pass him on, they should be prosecuted. Or they're accessory to murder.
And this is where we need to work out exactly what happened from the beginning to the end, because I think this started happening when he was a very young age. So
13,
possession of knives, obsession with murder, that's the vile things he's been viewing online. And this is why Keir Starmer's right to say that actually this is could become a big problem if we don't get this right. These people without clear ideologies who are obsessed with murder.
It is a big problem.
We've got to get on top of it.
We didn't get it right. 3 children are dead.
Absolutely, it's tragedy.
Is there, and by the way, this happened on a previous government's watch. This guy slipped through the net on the Conservative Party's watch, not Labour Party issue. I said the entire system is broken. And I just repeat the question. You say he's a terrorist. It seems clear if you download an Al-Qaeda manual and you're going around looking at genocide videos and you got caught with a knife 10 times and you've been expelled from school to trying to kill somebody, you're a terrorist.
And he has been charged with a terror offence for possession of that. But the specific attack was difficult for the CPS because of the evidence available to link it. The man's a terrorist. I make no, arguments about that. The man is a terrorist. But in order to make sure he went to prison, the CPS made the right decision.
So why didn't the Prime Minister agree with you? Why didn't Angela Rayner agree with you? Why did Merseyside police, right at the beginning, come out and say, definitely not terrorism? Who are they protecting?
So this is where I'm really clear that British values mean we put people like this in prison. If we say the wrong things for political reasons that jeopardise a case like that, that would be disgraceful. And luckily we didn't do that, and Keir Starmer was right.
OK, Mike Tapp, thank you. Let's get my panel involved now. Let's go first to you, Sir John Redwood. We might say this is semantics, but it's not. It's vitally, vitally important. If people like this are slipping through the necks, they don't tick the right box, and the entire system is broken.
Well, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, those poor children and their parents devastated by this obviously brutal terror attack, this indiscriminate violence, the way he wanted to go on and kill many more of them. None of us can really understand how anybody can be that evil. Yeah. And then we have these silly arguments about words, when, as you rightly say, you've made a very good case here this evening. He's a terrorist. He was putting fear into everybody. Everybody was terrorised by him. And as you rightly say, it wasn't the first time he showed this kind of inclination. So there does need to be a very thoroughgoing inquiry into all those people in the public services who had contact with him and who saw what he was doing. Why wasn't there a more effective intervention at an earlier stage? And I think the Home Secretary needs to deliver on what she said. She's basically said she's going to change the law. Well, get on with it.
Lord Mann, is it a fair criticism to say, I don't know, perhaps he was the wrong kind of terrorist, a black man threatening to kill white people, didn't tick a box? Has echoes of the grooming gang scandals, the rape gang scandals, turning a blind eye when it's an inconvenient truth? And is this the point? There's a huge rush to label anybody who had a problem with this as far right. People were called far right before they're even charged when they're at those protests. Not all the rioters, everybody. The Crown prosecution said, criminals, you're a member of the far right. Did that jeopardise their right to a fair trial? I would say it would. But there's a rush to call people far right. But in this instance, there's a real reluctance to call him a terrorist.
I think it's worse than that. And I think actually the danger we can underplay the mistakes that have been made by over-concentrating on the words. He clearly committed a terrorist act, but not in the law. Therefore, the law needs changing.
Right.
But it's worse than that. The way we define terrorism is too limited. And I'm not coming from that in the consequence of this horror, though that's obviously relevant directly. Actually, I was coming at that before, looking in terms of the work I have to do with the attacks on the Jewish community, of what is terrorism, and the application of how we see what is terrorism and who is a terrorist is in the law, but it's also in the application of government.
Right.
So you raised the PREVENT programme. The PREVENT programme clearly did not categorise this person as a terrorist. If they had,
it'd have had more attention, undoubtedly. And so it's beyond him, because there can be others. And I think in particular, it's dangerous to simplify, but I think it's accurate here. The lone wolf, who is not working with others, and as far as we can see, that's the case with him.
Yeah.
The lone wolf doesn't fit into how we're thinking about how terrorists operate. We're thinking about how terrorists operate as terrorist groups, terrorist gangs, nor as the individual who's decided. And when we're living in an era where people have got access to all sorts of stuff through their mobile phone and their computer, there are more such individuals committing outrageous acts like this. So we've got to change the practice as well as the law. So beyond the law, the practice of how we're dealing with people who actually are wanting to carry out terrorist attacks and are preparing to. Otherwise, there's going to be repeats.
So, John, isn't part of the problem here, you're absolutely right, the law, the nomenclature, the badge of being called a terrorist should be applied with equity, but it isn't. We seem in a real rush to accuse anybody of being a member of the far right, but these people don't fit any category. They slip through the net. 3 children could be alive if this guy had been picked up earlier and called a terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, that was my point, that there had been lots of contact and there was plenty of evidence. You'd have hoped there had been stronger action. And you're absolutely right about the asymmetry in the last few months, that if somebody is said to be far right, then anything can be said about them before a trial. And yet, as soon as there's somebody who doesn't fit into that category, then everybody goes coy and we get the full doctrine, you're not allowed to say anything at all. And so it's got to be fair for everybody. The law has to be blind as to whether people right, left or centre. These are murderers that we're talking about here tonight. I don't think they were murderers when a lot of these other cases were mentioned for the far right, but they may well have been criminals. You treat everybody as a potential criminal in these situations. You don't treat them as right, left or centre.
OK, gentlemen, thank you very much. Mike Tapp, Labour MP for Dover, thank you very much for coming in tonight. And thanks to my panel, of course. Stick with us. We'll be back with you soon. But coming up next, I'll be looking at the shocking statistics that reveals an astonishing 1 in 12 of everybody living in London is an illegal immigrant. Incredible stuff. And I'll be joined by the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Rob Bates. That's next.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Storm Aoin is already affecting parts of the Republic of Ireland with some heavy rain setting in, and the winds will continue to strengthen as we go through the night. Here is that storm system. It's been heading towards us over the past 24 hours and now, as I say, arriving across the Republic of Ireland, also throwing rain up across the southwest of the UK. There'll be some snow mixed in as it arrives across Northern Ireland, over the hills, and then as it spreads across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over the hills too, and wet weather sweeping across all areas by morning time. The main concern, though, is the winds. We have a number of Met Office warnings in place, including red weather warnings for Northern Ireland, central and southwestern Scotland. Gust of wind in that red zone, 90 miles an hour, maybe more in exposed areas. Amber weather warnings flanking that those red warnings. Also in here, significant disruption across northern England, North Wales and northern Scotland. So yes, very windy. Some of the strongest winds likely through the morning rush hour across Northern Ireland. Gusts here, as I said, 90 miles an hour, maybe more around coasts, but also then moving into the southwestern corner of Scotland and through the central belt during the morning into the early afternoon. But everywhere it's going to be a very blustery start. And of course, East Anglia in the southeast, it's also going to be a pretty wet start, but it will be a milder start than we've seen of late. That rain should tend to pull away, and actually for a good chunk of England and Wales, it's a dry, fine, bright day with some sunny spells, but it's going to be very windy, especially across northern England. Those damaging gusts, though, or the most damaging gusts, likely to head into western Scotland through the early afternoon and linger in northern Scotland even into the overnight period. Temperatures a little higher than they have been, of course, not feeling all that mild with the strength of the winds. Saturday's a calmer day, a cold start, some showers in the west, many places dry and bright. Do keep up to date with the forecast. See those warnings for yourself on the Met Office website.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. Now, shock new data has revealed that almost 600,000 of London's residents have absolutely no right to be in the United Kingdom. That's according to a Freedom of Information request made by The Telegraph. The concerns over border control failures and pressure on public services are growing by the minute, but official figures from the Home Office are simply not available. Well, the previously secret reports commissioned by Thames Water, of all people, suggest there are over 1 million illegal migrants in the UK, with an astonishing 60% of all of them in the capital. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Robert Bates, the Research Director of the Centre for Migration Control, and of course my illustrious panel, the former Conservative MP and Minister Sir John Redwood and the Labour peer Lord John Mann. Gentlemen, welcome. Robert, let's start with you. School me in the basics. How on earth can we quantify people who are here illegally? How do we reach the figure of 1 million in the country and almost 600,000 in London?
So water usage and food consumption have really been the secret for kind of identifying the illegal migrant population in countries. They've kind of provided a clue that many research bodies have used to kind of get a feel for the number of illegal migrants in the country. What Thames Valley have done is they've used recent registrations for national insurance numbers to try and get a gauge of the way the population is increasing, and then they've cross-calculated that with kind of water consumption, and they've made an assessment. I would argue that their assessment probably falls slightly short of the scale of the problem. I think previous research has suggested that there's about 1.2 million people in the country illegally. That was produced in 2017 by Pew Research. But the point is that it's an incredibly difficult metric to actually quantify. It's incredibly hard to know, given that we don't do exit checks, how many people, when they come into the UK on a short-term visa, which is the key route here.
And that's the key point. When you say, oh my word, 1 in 12 are illegal immigrants, they would have all come on dinghies. No, they came in the front door. They came in legally, on visas, and never cleared off home.
Yeah, so it's important to remember the small boat crisis only really started in 2018. I mean, we've had illegal migration problems in this country for a lot longer than that. I think we need to realise that by removing the exit checks that we are carrying out as people arrive in the UK on short-term visas, on study visas and temporary worker, seasonal worker routes as well, we're completely blind, therefore, as to how many people are leaving the country, whether people are honouring the obligations that they enter into when they take this visa.
Right. So you've got 600,000 people in London alone who've got no right to be here, but they've got national insurance numbers. What are they doing for a living?
Well, I'd argue that a lot of them are probably, involved in the black economy, are probably making ends meet via hook or by crook, and I think that's part of the problem here. The fact that these people aren't really on the official government radar, we don't really know too much about them. There is a real risk of crime that comes with that, and I think we also need to realise that when you have a huge illegal immigrant population like we have now in Britain, I think we're the European outlier. We are far ahead of many other European nations in terms of illegal migrants in the country. That there is an increased pressure on public services that come with that as well, because these people will still need to see doctors, they will still need dental surgery and whatnot, and so there is a huge cost that comes with that as well, apart from the obviously societal costs and the sheer erosion that it represents of the British border.
Part of the report concludes that schools and the NHS are, quotes, crumbling, with black economy and delivery drivers in particular a concern. We see hundreds and hundreds of Deliveroo drivers, don't we, kind of swanning around the capital. This is making a direct conclusion. They're here illegally, working on the black economy. How? Well, are they leasing out somebody else's data, or are the companies themselves responsible? If they're employing illegal immigrants, surely the company should be slammed down on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that needs to be done, and frankly, we're not doing anything at the moment. The Immigration Minister, Angela Eagle, a couple of months ago made it very clear that she didn't have a clue how many illegal migrants were in the country, and her approach when she was being interviewed by Trevor Phillips was almost, well, what do you want me to do about it? We're not doing anywhere near enough for the government to actually identify how many people are here illegally, what routes they are using to subsist on, where they're staying, the pressures that are putting on different aspects of public services, and really we're not getting a full picture. I mean, it's bad enough, to be perfectly honest, we don't actually know how many legal migrants are in this country as well. That's an important point that we need to raise. We are completely blind when it comes to a lot of our immigration system, especially when it comes to illegal immigration.
OK, Rob Bates, thank you very much. Stick with us. Let's bring in my panel now. I'm going to come to you first, Sir John Redwood, again, because let's face it, if there are 1 million people here legally, they came in on the Conservative watch. We haven't taken back control of our border, despite what the promises were made during Brexit. They come in on a short visa. They never clear off. Why are they being booted out of the country?
Well, they should have been. It's a bad mistake by the past government, and it was one of the main reasons that they were cast out of power with such a poor vote. And we were looking for change, and now we want these ministers to show a sense of urgency and ability that the last government didn't show. Because we're meant to have really good quality national statistics supplied at taxpayer expense by the government. We just learnt that they're completely wrong. They're grossly underestimating the true numbers. And the reason you need those good statistics is that people have to plan how many school places they're going to be in each area and how much medical provision there needs to be, and above all, how much housing, and where are you going to build all these extra houses? And no wonder we're short of houses and rents are through the roof in London, because we're looking at 500, 600,000 extra people all needing some housing and often having to come to informal arrangements because they're not legally registered here, but they still get housing, they pay rent, and a lot of it is not seen by the authorities.
Yeah, Lord Mann, let's be absolutely honest. You've got 1 million people in a country illegally. They're not paying in. They're working the black economy. They're working hand to mouth. They're a drain on schools. They're a drain on public services. And yet we have, in particular, a mayor in Sadiq Khan who presumably would say, well, you're racist if you mention this. Diversity is our strength. Is there any kind of teeth whatsoever within the Labour Party to do something about this?
Well, that's a big question. Is the government going to do something about it? I agree with Robert. I think these statistics are accurate. This is the scale of the problem. So they're not false, fake statistics. They're real statistics. So we have a snapshot of what the problem is. I disagree with him in saying that the majority are working in the black economy. I think the problem actually is a different one. I think most of these people, and the evidence I see, they're working in the real economy. The delivery drivers are being paid as employees. The weakness we have, in my view, the draw, the pull to come into this country and the ability to stay. You need money to stay, so you need some kind of income. The companies are employing them. And we're the only... If you compare with Germany, you can't just go get a job in Germany. You've got to have an ID. And the part solution...
Well, they've got an NI number, but they're still getting employed.
Anyone can get an NI number.
Well, that's the problem. That should be the key to the system.
We need an ID card, a digital proper ID card.
But they're illegal. How would that be better than an NI number? Why don't they carry an ID card? They're illegal.
An ID, a digital ID... In a way, we've got digital passports now.
Well, we've got a digital NI.
In order to use the NHS.
But they're illegal by definition, Lord Mann, with the greatest respect. They're not saying, oh, I'm here illegally, give me an ID card, please, so you can kick me out.
If it's not illegal, it is, technically. There's a handful of civil servants chasing after every company doing this. And we're talking big companies. If we look at the delivery drivers, the viewers know who's delivering stuff. They see it outside their house or even to their house, day in, day out. These are big-name companies.
But it's the government's that's wrong to give them an NI number, because the company says, well, if they've got an NI number, they must be able to work
And that's the thing we can sort. Right? You can't get in and out of this country with your passport.
Well, they want to get out of the country. They're already
through the airport. No. And you're counting people out. We've got digital systems now. We're not using them to count people out. We need a digital ID card. Everyone should have an ID card. Do you all have passports? Do you have a passport? Do you have a passport?
I don't.
Yes.
I don't walk around.
Yes.
We don't live in a show as you. I know Tony Blair would love us all to be a walking ID card. He would love us all to be a barcode. Why should regular citizens?
You've got one. You've got
obey
one.
the law?
No, you have one.
To get an ID
I have one.
because a million people are illegally.
Better than national insurance numbers.
Everyone
I
who
think the point
doesn't
is
have a passport, everyone who doesn't have a passport, a British passport, should be required to have an ID card, and in order to work, you should be showing either your passport or your digital ID in order to use the NHS.
Yeah,
and that would transform the situation.
I agree that it would be great to stop
anything else will
tourism.
be papering over the cracks.
All right, we have to leave it there, gentlemen. Great debate. Thank you very much, Rob Bates. Always a pleasure. Certainly got us talking here in the studio. And the Metropolitan Police have today been taken out of special measures despite failing in almost every single area last summer. Well, with crime up across Sadiq Khan's capital, is this the time to be praising our police service? That's next.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're tempted to leave the stormy weather in the UK behind and search for some winter sun, actually, there will be some across the Mediterranean, certainly some sunny spells for the Canaries, just 1 or 2 showers around. Windier for Portugal, that's all connected to Friday's storm in the UK, a few showers for Spain, but a lot of fine weather across Italy and Greece aside from the odd shower. Then it does turn much more unsettled across Spain, Portugal and into parts of France during the weekend.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Jonathan, in London, we're hearing that there could be more posties from an Amazon point of view in order to limit or cut carbon emissions, but that they could put more people on foot delivering their parcels.
This is really interesting because more and more people now obviously are using Amazon and buying their shopping online or buying gifts online. And it's interesting that in London they're talking about putting their Amazon workers on foot. There are now parts of the country, I think Milton Keynes is one part of the country, where there's robots delivering parcels. Or
Really?
You'll see these, well, they call them robots. You'll see these little things sort of bundling down the street.
Yes.
Sort of,
robots.
Yeah, I mean, technically they're a robot, but when I think of a robot, I think of a sort of...
A humanoid robot.
Yeah, sort of humanoid thing, sort of, Lost in Space style robot. But actually, they're sort of... little sort of carriages, little
droids,
boxes,
like Star Wars droid type.
Well, they're not
thing.
even that. They're like a little sort of, they're like a box on wheels, delivering parcels in places like Milton Keynes and other bits of the country. So I think this is just another example of how the world is changing. Online shopping is completely changing the way in which we all live our lives, the way in things. The way
But
in
I
which
think
things are
Milton
delivered.
Keynes lends itself to something like that. This is a newly designed town. And
Exactly, that's why they're in Milton Keynes.
And I really do think that a town like that really does lend itself towards a piece of tech like that. When I think back, our postie in Gloucestershire is a guy called Dave. He's fantastic. Everyone knows who he is. But I'm not sure that he could be replaced by one of these little droid things.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Dalby. Now, the Metropolitan Police Force has been removed from special measures despite the watchdog finding it was failing in almost every area back in just August. Well, the Met was put into the enhanced monitoring in 2022 after a series of scandals, including, of course, the horrific murder of Sarah Everard by serving police officer Wayne Couzens in 2021. Now, just last summer, the watchdog said the Met was failing in almost every single area. And last month, the Commissioner, Mark Rowley, admitted that proposed budget cuts would mean the force would have to scale back its ability to tackle serious violence and organised crime. But with cases of shoplifting, violent crime and sexual assaults, just to name a few, up in the capital, is this the right move? Well, let's continue the conversation with my illustrious panel, the former Conservative MP and Minister Sir John Redwood and the Labour peer Lord John Mann. Lord Mann, I'll start with you this time. I've lived in London 30 years. I've never known it so dangerous. I have lost count of the times I see flowers tied to lampposts. I have to tell my young children about knife crime, about the terror of living in the city. People are afraid to live in London. People aren't going out. The economy is suffering. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, is the de facto police and crime commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Doesn't seem to do anything about it. Mark Rowley himself seems more bothered about, I don't know, keeping pro-Palestine protesters happy than actually stamping down on crime. Where does the buck stop?
Well, the buck stops with the Prime Minister and the buck stops with the head of the Met, and it has to do. Whoever Prime Minister, whoever the head of the Met is. That's the system. The head of the Met needs to deliver, and they've got the responsibility. I'm looking for consistency, including consistency across the Met. In my world, and plenty of discussions with the Met, including Mr. Rowley, plenty of discussions with government, consistency.
Well,
it's as consistency,
consistent rising knife crime, and consistently rising violence.
And you mentioned the anti-Jewish sentiment, protests, and so on. It's hard to get an angle on that, on what is needed, when different things are happening in different parts of London. That consistency is crucial. One of the things we've lost, I think, the College of Policing was meant to be there to give consistency, not just in London, but across the country. It's weaker than it was, much weaker, and it needs to be pulled together. Wherever you are in the country, you should expect the same service from the police, and all of us here ought to know what that service should be. And then if it's not happening, you can say, why not? Here's what you should be doing. Part of the problem is we can't do that, because the police are saying, well, we do this, we don't do that. We don't have the resource for this. They need more money and they need consistency.
I'd say, Sir John, it's something more than that. Where I live, I see Santa more often than I see police officers walking around the streets. You just don't see any coppers anymore. You see them driving past with their sirens blowing. You don't see a bobby on the beat. They're almost an endangered species.
Well, I think Mayor Khan needs to get a grip on it, because the mayor, since Boris Johnson wrestled powers away from the Home Secretary, has very considerable powers of leadership and responsibilities. And I think the electors of the current mayor feel very let down, because this is one of the big things the mayor could really do. Make sure there are enough police and that they have the proper resources to back them up, but also guide them on the priorities, because you've listed some of the key priorities. I, as an occasional resident in London, you as a permanent resident in London, we want to know that the streets are as safe as they can be.
Well, they're not.
And that if they're not, that is the priority. Surely the safety of people must come before everything else.
Well, you'd think that'd be the case, Lord Mann, but, I mean, they seem to be wasting a lot of time policing tweets and not streets.
Well, they've got a massive job to do. Big issues to deal with, major crime, violent crime. We have to resource them. We have to resource them. Society has to decide we're going to resource the police properly, give them the powers they need, but insist that they're consistent and they're held to account.
But they're not consistent.
They're not consistent. That's a problem.
Let's talk about knife crime. Look at the faces of the dead. Look at the faces of the killers. What do we see in London? We have a cultural problem. We've got a problem with knife crime, particularly amongst the black community. Let's admit it. Hey, call me racist. The facts are the facts. Say that to Mayor Khan, he won't even entertain the notion. Clamp down on stop and search. What's institutionally racist? He campaigned against it. when he was elected as mayor first time round. Isn't that the problem? We've got a problem, but they're too scared to address the reality.
There should be stop and search. Also, there should be police, but that needs resource. There should be police in the schools and working in the schools and working from a young age in the schools. The more people see, hear, feel the police, the more police see the young kids coming through, the better it's going to be. But that's not going to happen at the moment because the police that we've got, the resource that's there, is stretched and pulled in every direction. The policing need more resource, but they need that consistency. And therefore, I think this has to become a huge priority for the government, a huge priority, because things have dwindled away over the years.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Labour government, what's the problem with putting the extra resource in? The last Conservative government was actually getting money available to recruit more police.
Sorry,
they were needed very clearly.
Sir John, I'm having to live in London, working down here. Not all the time, but enough. I haven't noticed in the last 13, 14 years more police around, more resource for
You're
police.
Absolutely right. Gentlemen, we have to quickly move on because Matt Goodwin is presenting State of the Nation next. Matt, welcome to the studio. What's on your show?
Thanks, Martin. Well, we're going to be looking at some of the big unanswered questions about Axel Ruder-Cabana, and I'm going to try and ask some questions that I don't think people in Westminster are really asking. And we're also going to be looking at...
Go on, like what?
Well, wait for the show. Yeah. We're also going to be looking at this issue of illegal migration in London, but we're going to be talking to the man of the moment in the House of Commons, Rupert Lowe, about what he would do to fix this crisis in the capital. We're then looking at Donald Trump's Davos speech and how basically is the Davos man dead? Has he been defeated? The ideology behind Davos, behind the sort of global elite. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at Catherine Birbalsingh, Britain's most successful headmistress. She said that actually Labour are now indoctrinating kids through various ideologies in the schools. We're going to be looking a bit at that. We've got some great people on. We've got a great panel, so I'll see you in a few minutes. And we're looking for the truth. We're going to keep chasing the truth.
And I think there are so many questions yet to ask about Axel Ruder-Cabana.
Absolutely.
And I know you've got some juicy stuff coming up. Fantastic. Make sure you stay tuned. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Of course, Lord Mann and Sir John Redwood, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I'll be back tomorrow, 3 till 6. So stick around, because next, State of the Nation with that man, Matt Goodwin. First, though, is your weather with Alex Deakin.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Storm Aoin is already affecting parts of the Republic of Ireland with some heavy rain setting in, and the winds will continue to strengthen as we go through the night. Here is that storm system. It's been heading towards us over the past 24 hours and now, as I say, arriving across the Republic of Ireland, also throwing rain up across the southwest of the UK. There'll be some snow mixed in as it arrives across Northern Ireland, over the hills, and then as it spreads across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over the hills too, and wet weather sweeping across all areas by morning time. The main concern, though, is the winds. We have a number of Met Office warnings in place, including red weather warnings for Northern Ireland, central and southwestern Scotland. Gust of wind in that red zone, 90 miles an hour, maybe more in exposed areas. Amber weather warnings flanking that those red warnings. Also in here, significant disruption across northern England, North Wales and northern Scotland. So yes, very windy. Some of the strongest winds likely through the morning rush hour across Northern Ireland. Gusts here, as I said, 90 miles an hour, maybe more around coasts, but also then moving into the southwestern corner of Scotland and through the central belt during the morning into the early afternoon. But everywhere it's going to be a very blustery start. And across East Anglia in the southeast, it's also going to be a pretty wet start, but it will be a milder start than we've seen of late. That rain should tend to pull away, and actually for a good chunk of England and Wales, it's a dry, fine, bright day with some sunny spells, but it's going to be very windy, especially across northern England. Those damaging gusts, though, or the most damaging gusts, likely to head into western Scotland through the early afternoon and linger in northern Scotland even into the overnight period. Temperatures a little higher than they have been, of course, not feeling all that mild with the strength of the winds. Saturday's a calmer day, a cold start, some showers in the west, many places dry and bright. Do keep up to date with the forecast. See those warnings for yourself on the Met Office website.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine how
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie.